With Brightline finally breaking ground on their latest high-speed expansion project from Las Vegas to San Bernardino, I thought we could take a look at some of the best expansion candidates for high-speed rail within the US. If you didn't know, Brightline's original rail line in Florida terminates in Orlando at Orlando International Airport and continues on with stops in West Palm Beach, Boca Raton, Fort Lauderdale, Aventura, and terminating in Miami Central. It's proved to be highly successful with a 2023 ridership of over 2 million passengers, attracting riders with convenience, comfort, speed, beautiful terminals, and onboard amenities such as free Wi-Fi, charging plugs, and even food and beverage stations. So to kick off the countdown for the best candidates for Brightline expansion, my number 10 would have to be an Atlanta to Savannah, Georgia line. For me, this is a fantastic choice, and probably a little under the radar. This is the least likely option, but I think there's a case to be made. Georgia has a lot of people, a little over 11 million, and this route would go through at least 3 of the top 5 most populous cities in the state. Terminating in Atlanta and Savannah, the first and 5th most populous cities in the state, it would mostly follow the Interstate 16 corridor, and would make one stop in Macon. Macon is the state's 4th most populous city, and is home to a healthy economy made up of mostly aerospace, advanced manufacturing, food processing, healthcare, and warehouse and distribution industries, but is also home to a small commercial and cargo regional airport, as well as a private research university of Mercer University. I predict this route would be a huge success, relieving the awful traffic in greater Atlanta while also contributing to the growth of Savannah, a city already on the rise, after declining much of the late 20th century. This connection between the biggest city and the oldest city in the state would be invaluable. Atlanta is a powerhouse of a city, projected to grow to 8 million residents by 2050, so light rail and high-speed rail in the area connecting it with the coast would be huge for commuters and vacationers. This would be a game-changing solution to the famously horrific traffic of the Atlanta metro area. Coming in at number 9 is the Chicago to Detroit line, and this is actually a route that would terminate in the Chicago suburbs of Aurora and Naperville, which are the 2nd and 3rd biggest cities in Illinois on their own right, with plenty of commuters contributing to car traffic flowing into the Windy City. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people. They should absolutely be included on this route, which would then proceed to roll into Chicago, making a stop, and then wrap around the southern end of Lake Michigan, entering the state of Michigan, where it would roughly follow the I-94 corridor, making stops in Benton Harbor, Ann Arbor, and then lastly in downtown Detroit. The current rail connection between Chicago and Detroit is operated by Amtrak, of course, and it takes 5.5 hours, making 8 stops. And it had a very respectable ridership of 420,000 passengers in fiscal year 2023. A Brightline service would shave hours off this commute time though, and I could see it being a great benefit to sports fans mostly. Detroit and Chicago are rivals in pretty much every major league sport, so fans traveling to and from out-of-town games would benefit hugely, and so would Brightline from all that built-in demand. Consequently, this would go on to reduce the need for parking. Soldier Field, home of the Chicago Bears, desperately needs this. Just look at all this prime land that could be used for something, well, anything other than slabs of concrete for cars during the team's 13-game season. Waterfront retail under dense apartment housing and expanding park space all sounds like a viable option to me. The same benefits could be attributed to Ford Field and Comerica Park in Detroit. I also think the opportunity for college students at the University of Michigan, as well as those located in downtown Chicago and Detroit, would be a major beneficiary for this route, allowing for further job prospects and overall economic growth and prosperity between the metros. The next expansion on this top 10 list sort of attaches itself to the previous one, and it's a Minneapolis to Chicago line. The city of Minneapolis has been experiencing tremendous growth, the likes of which it hasn't seen since the 1930s industrial era boom. People are moving here, and high-speed rail connection to Chicago is imperative in my opinion. This line would stop in Madison and Milwaukee, Wisconsin, eventually terminating in Chicago. You can make a case for a stoppage in Eau Claire, but I like this route. I like the Minneapolis terminus to be in between the cities of St. Paul and the aforementioned, possibly in this block across the street from Alliance Field, home of the Twin Cities MLS team. You already have light rail access north of these blocks, serving the greater metro, and a Brightline station making better use of this parking lot field would no doubt be a more efficient use of time, space, and money. Madison and Milwaukee are kind of a no-brainer on this high-speed rail proposal, and the fact that there isn't already light rail or even Amtrak rail service connecting the state's biggest city with the capital is just kind of depressing, honestly. Staying in this area of the country and further highlighting the Midwest's need for rail connection and just flat out incompetent lack of it, it's a Cincinnati to Pittsburgh line. This connection would have one stop in Columbus, and it might just be the most important city out of the three in terms of connection. Currently, Amtrak has service stopping in both Cincinnati and Pittsburgh via the Cardinal and Capital Limited lines respectively, and Pittsburgh is even served with high-speed rail via the Acela train to and from Philadelphia. At the bare minimum, being able to connect one Ohio city in Cincinnati to Columbus via a high-speed rail connection would lower car congestion on various interstates and state highways between the two cities, and would mean shaving precious time off the hour-and-a-half commute between the cities, meaning getting cars off the street and therefore reducing accidents. And if paired with multi-use, transit-oriented land development, would invigorate the economies of both cities. Cincinnati would especially benefit from this, as they are just starting to gain back lost population and focus on urbanization and redevelopment, which is evident in its hugely successful streetcar system known as the Connector, which had a record high number of passengers in 2023 since opening in 2016. Similarly to the Detroit-Chicago proposal, I believe this line would benefit sports fans, as there are just so many great sports teams in this corridor, with fans itching for an easier way to catch their team playing away games in rivaling cities. And one last side note, I could definitely see a case for Louisville, Kentucky to be the terminus instead of Cincinnati, with 2 stops between there and Pittsburgh. But that would shape up for a pretty long stretch of rail for high-speed service, and I'm just not sure that there would be enough demand in Louisville for Brightline to turn any sort of profit here. But in time, who knows? The next proposal is the first of 3 triangle-shaped high-speed rail lines on this top 10, and that would be a Nashville-Atlanta-Charlotte line. This line would be a very expansive project, but connecting these 3 southern powerhouse cities by high-speed rail would be invaluable for the socioeconomic development of this region. All 3 of these cities and their metro areas are growing rapidly, which will continue to exacerbate their current transportation inequalities until a high-speed rail link is built. Nashville doesn't really have any light rail within its own city, so that would be a great start, but this triangular high-speed rail concept isn't purely about connecting the big cities. It's what's in between that's perhaps more important. Terminating in Atlanta, this route would include stops in Chattanooga, Nashville, Knoxville, Asheville, Charlotte, Athens, and Greenville. That's quite extensive, incorporating everything from college towns, albeit some of the biggest and most well-known ones in the country, as well as mid-sized cities in desperate need of rail connection. The area is kind of a no man's land in terms of Amtrak service, and this isn't really for any good reason at all. Places like Asheville and Chattanooga were founded on the rail industry, and it's high time we brought passenger rail connection back to the area. Atlanta is shaping up to be a major hub of high-speed rail in the coming decades, which would be fitting for the city home to the world's busiest airport. Shifting focus onto the Mountain West with yet another Big 3 connection, it's a Denver-Salt Lake City-Boise high-speed rail line. Now, this isn't a list of what I think the most likely high-speed rail lines Brightline might decide on, but I do believe these are where it's needed the most, and this connection would be just as, if not more important than the prior Tri-City focused line. The biggest obstacle here is obvious: the Rocky Mountains. But if they did it back in the 80s for the construction of Interstate 70, then they can do it here in the present day too for high-speed rail. Critics of this proposal would likely point out Boise's lack of size and possible lack of demand, and suggest that this line would work, but only from Denver to Salt Lake City, and vice versa. But I'd flat out disagree. While Boise is mid-sized to maybe a smaller city, it's growing at a rapid pace, and soon enough residents will start asking for a way in and out of the city that doesn't require 4 tires. Instead of following any interstate pathway, like most of the other prior top candidates, I think this high-speed rail line should be built completely from scratch. It's not my job to figure out how or what the best way to work through the Rockies would be, but this Mountain West corridor could definitely use some high-speed rail. For the benefit of tourism, I do think the route should include some stops through the I-70 ski corridor, perhaps in Vail, before continuing on to Park City, Salt Lake City, Twin Falls, and then terminating in Boise. Even if you want to exclude the Twin Falls and Boise edition, you have to acknowledge the fact that it currently takes way too long to travel between these Mountain West powerhouse cities by car, and there isn't even Amtrak service. This one, to me, is a no-brainer. Another no-brainer route, again with no direct rail connection currently, is between the 2nd and 5th biggest cities in the US. High-speed rail from Los Angeles to Phoenix, Arizona. This route would literally just be a straight line following Interstate 10, and maybe instead of terminating in San Bernardino, gross, We could have this terminate somewhere more useful, such as Santa Monica or LA Union Station. The city is still putting off a major expansion project to LA Union that is increasingly more needed as the years wear on and LA's Metrolink demand rises. So whether it's now or later, LA Union needs to start looking like Penn Station ASAP. With that being said, this commuter connection would provide a secondary option for those frequenting Phoenix and LA and don't want to suffer through the 6-hour one-way drive. A high-speed rail link traveling at 125 miles per hour, only stopping briefly in Palm Springs, could cut the travel time in half to just over 3 hours if my calculations are correct. This would be huge for so many business people, travel sports teams, and even casual riders. And since the LA to Las Vegas link is already happening, this would pretty much act as an expansion project to Brightline West, which would then provide cause for a direct link between Las Vegas and Phoenix, completing the triangle of transit. Speaking of triangles of transit, our next route is another one ripe with discussion when people mull over the next Brightline expansion after Brightline West. And that would be the triangle of Dallas, San Antonio, and Houston. An obvious choice here, folks, and for that reason, I don't have too much to say about it. Of course, it would be highly profitable, provide high-speed options for millions of people, achieve record ridership upon opening, and increase demand for the rail-starved state. There is currently zero rail connection between Dallas and Houston, Texas. Do I need to repeat that again? Okay, fine, I'll do it. There is no rail connection between Dallas and Houston, Texas. Luckily, you can get from San Antonio to both Dallas and Houston via the Texas Eagle and Sunset Limited lines respectively, but a high-speed connection would make it so that business travelers, commuters, and tourists could travel between the state's 3 biggest cities interchangeably in record time. A car ride from Dallas to Houston is on average 3.5 hours, way too far for daily office commuting, let alone out-of-town Rockets and Texans fans wanting to catch some hometown sports on a weekly basis. High-speed rail would cut this down to just under 2 hours, non-stop. This triangular route would travel from Dallas onto Austin, San Antonio, Houston, and then back into Dallas, with a possible stop in Waco, but I'm not completely convinced as of yet. All these cities are growing, all of these metros are growing, and they yearn for high-speed rail. This is one I'm interested in hearing about from you all down in the comments section. If there's one region in the US that's most deserving of high-speed rail connection, it's the Pacific Northwest, specifically a fast, round-trip, direct connection from Seattle to Portland. These two cities embody the kind of urbanistic growth that all other major US cities should model themselves after. From bike infrastructure to light rail expansion to pedestrian infrastructure, Seattle and Portland are doing things best in my opinion. And these two cities are massively interconnected socioeconomically. And the forward-thinking residents of Cascadia very much want this to happen. A 125 mile per hour high-speed rail connection between the cities would make a trafficy 3.5 hour drive into just over an hour. Think about what that would do for the economies of Seattle and Portland. This line would be incredibly popular and therefore incredibly profitable, and I'm kind of shocked that it isn't talked more about for Brightline expansion. It truly would do a world of good for accessibility in the region and improve congestion and decrease the reliance on a slow-moving Amtrak train, as well as automobiles. Car ownership is decreasing in both Seattle and Portland, and both the car-free and car-owning residents would absolutely welcome and utilize a Brightline PNW line, which would hopefully one day connect with our final Brightline expansion candidate, a line stretching from San Francisco to San Diego. When I think of this proposal, I kind of get frustrated in pondering why the heck Brightline is awarding Las Vegas with high-speed rail in the first place. Like, out of all the high-speed rail options laid out in this video, you settled for a San Bernardino, a city that's so far from the center of LA metro area it's scary, to Las Vegas, a car-centric city with seemingly no plans to urbanize and is set on sprawling out in every which way. I'll say that for the business passengers, I could see this route getting some decent ridership, but even then, are people really living in LA, one of the most highly taxed cities in the nation, with not many saving graces other than its sometimes historic charm and mostly mild weather, commuting to Las Vegas for work? I mean, these are two cities that are trending in the wrong direction with less than impressive livability standards, so I'm just kind of confused. If you're working in Las Vegas, you should be living there, certainly over LA. That kind of just seems like a no-brainer to me. But even for tourism, Speaking as an LA resident, surrounded by other LA residents, people really only go to Las Vegas for gambling, debauchery, the likes of which you can't even experience in LA, so that's saying something. And like I mentioned, Las Vegas is just LA, but hotter. Isn't there already enough gambling done on our phones these days anyway? I'd hate for Brightline to take a huge loss on this line and then blame the lack of demand on a broader indifference to high-speed rail nationwide. But who knows? Maybe they'll learn and give us what we really want. And what we want is a high-speed rail line from San Diego to San Francisco, full stop. The fact that you can't even take a train from San Diego directly to San Francisco is bordering on criminal. As a frequent traveler of both the Pacific Surfliner and Coast Starlight, the trains are kind of a joke, constantly riddled with delays, needing to be repaired, and in serious need of updating. I guess I'll be thankful that I can at least take a train from LA to San Diego in all of about 4 hours, even though I've driven the route in under 2. Amtrak's last priority on tracks owned by Metrolink certainly doesn't help, though. I just can't figure out why this hasn't been done already. Instead, Gavin Newsom's Caltrans seems hellbent on widening freeways up and down the I-5 corridor for no other reason than to waste that land that could be used for something like a Brightline high-speed rail line. The current drive time from San Diego to San Francisco is hard to predict because you're going to run into a lot of potential hours of traffic stoppages and slowdowns no matter what time of day you take the trip. Leaving from San Diego at 7 a.m. on a random Thursday in May gives you anywhere from 7 to 10 hours for nonstop driving time. Meanwhile, if a high-speed rail link was built alongside Interstate 5, it would take just 4 hours nonstop, and that's going at a minimum speed of 125 miles per hour. But of course, there would be stops. Not many though. Starting from downtown San Diego, ideally the train would continue on to Anaheim, Los Angeles, San Jose, and finally San Francisco. If only the state made it easier to build something like this. But let me know what you think about these 10 proposals down in the comments section below. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any future videos like this one, and I'll see you next week from 4th place.